more interesting. I think the videos in this section, this last section of the lecture, are a little bit more interesting, so stay awake. So we're now going to look at the opposite side. So the proposition before us is U.S. space assets are threatened. So we're going to say, no, those space threats are insignificant. That we can put up our assets in space. We don't necessarily need to worry so much. All this is hype. It's just doomsday stuff about everybody, disabling our satellites. In fairness, part of me thinks that the yes side of the question is true, but empirics seem to be a little bit on this side. We've had military satellites since 1960, and we really haven't seen all of these, they're going to shoot down our satellites, they're going to jam them with radio. We haven't really seen all of that. So it seems like if the threat was real, as we would like them to believe on the yes side question, there would be a little more empirics besides this. Yes, we know China has an ASAT program, but they shot down their own satellite. They did not use that against us. Now, the question maybe is because we really haven't been in a hostile conflict with any of the spacefaring powers. You could argue that the Chinese, so if you're on the no side of the question, you could argue first that the Chinese ASAT program is not a threat. Right? One of the huge sides of the yes side would say is our assets are threatened. We got those Chinese and Russians over there. So you can take the side that the China's ASAT program is not a threat. There is some argument to be made that there's a difference between having ASAT weapons and the capabilities and having an ASAT program or system. Yes, China shot down its own satellite in 2007. It clearly has some capabilities. But it doesn't have, there are arguments in research that claim they don't have an overall program or system that really is a huge threat to us. Okay? So a widespread, stable program does not exist, according to some of the research. Obviously, it's up for debate, which is why there's a big question. Folks argue that what capabilities China does have is not a threat to our conventional forces. Okay? And here's the distinction, and these are where these little warrants help you win debates. So little nuggets of wisdom like this. There's research out there that says China has invested a lot on navigation and communication satellites. So they can communicate with their military commanders, they can navigate, but they don't have much investment in surveillance and reconnaissance satellites. That's where the threat comes in, the ability for China to spy on us. They don't have a lot of those satellites. Okay? So do you see the difference? Like you can get up and say, oh, Chinese ASAT program's not a threat. Yes, they are. No, they're not. Yes, they are. No, they're not. You, on the no side, should make the distinction and have the cards that say, you're right, China has an ASAT program, but they focus on navigation and communication, that's not a threat to us. Okay? Unless we're in a war with China, right? Okay, then we probably don't want them to be able to communicate with their military commanders. But communication, navigation satellites, that doesn't interfere with our capabilities. If they had a lot of surveillance satellites and a lot of reconnaissance satellites, then maybe we can perceive them as more of a threat. You see why that's a better debate than just saying, they've got a program. No, they're not. Yes, they do. No, they're not. Making those self-distinctions about what specific satellites China has and China doesn't. There are also arguments under this that say China has no desire to be a space power. Okay? Yes, they have some programs, yes, they have some ASAT, but they're not a threat because they don't have the desire to be a space power. They're only developing means to defend themselves, not to counterbalance or push out the United States from being a space power. There is a lot of research that claims the reason why China doesn't desire to be a space power is that the price tag of entrance is too high. China does want to modernize its military. They want to become a power in some areas. But to catch up to the United States, remember, what was the percentage of, we know that 200 of the 1,000 satellites that are in orbit now belong to our military satellites. What percent belongs to the U.S.? 90%. For China to become a space power, they got a lot of catch-up to do. If we own 90% of the military satellites, okay, that is a huge price tag to enter in, and China says it's not worth it. Okay? We've got regional power, regional hegemony, and a lot of other ways we can modernize our military. So the argument made is China's not a threat because they don't want to be. They don't want to spend all that massive amount of money to catch up and overtake the United States. Okay? If you're on the no side of the question, so we said China not developing anti-satellite weapons, they're not a threat to a conventional force, and again, that's the distinguishment between types of satellites that China has. We also said they have no desire to be a space power. The price tag is too high. China relies on the United States for a lot of things like trade, partnerships, and so forth, and for them to amp up their space power program would only have them feel isolated. Okay, so the second main argument, so we're back to the fundamental question, space threats are insignificant. You can argue China's not a space power. You probably also need to argue that Russia's not a space power threat. The number one reason why people, and remember we talked about that Oberg author said that we've been really underestimating Russia's threat?
Yeah.
Okay. The answer to that is that threat's not underestimated because Russia has a lot of structural barriers that prevent them from space development. It may seem like a long, long time ago that the Soviet Union collapsed and, became all the different former Soviet republics, and it has been. But that takes a long time to recover. The infrastructure, okay, for the ability for Russia to even build all this equipment isn't there. Okay? They don't have stable bureaucracies yet that can oversee massive space power programs, is what the argument on this side would be. There's certainly arguments on the others that say they do. Okay? Russia does invest a lot of money, and again, this is a distinction that you can make, just like with China. Russia invests a lot of money in early warning satellites and capabilities, so they know if a missile's coming at them, as well as military communications satellites. But there's not a lot of evidence or research that they are investing a lot of money in ASAT technology, okay, or offensive weapon capabilities. So really what research we have, okay, can kind of conclude that what Russia's investing in on their space militarization is benign for us. They're communicating with their own commanders, they're, early warning in case a missile is launched at them. Well, last time we checked, we're not in a war with Russia. That's not really a threat to us. So there's a difference between somebody developing capabilities and somebody developing capabilities that threaten us. And that's the distinction you need to make if you're on the no side of the question. You can see, you're right, China, Russia developing military technology in space. That is different than them developing threatening military technology. Okay? You can also make the argument that Russia's not a threat because they're actually committed to space control. They have made a lot more olive branches, for lack of a better term, or advocating a lot more treaties and negotiations and arms deals to limit space weaponization than the United States has. Okay? Part of that may be because Russia realizes the United States is so far ahead of them in space, so it is to their benefit to limit the United States' further control of space. But to say that they are a threat, there's a lot of literature that exists that their diplomatic stances in regards to their leaders wanting various treaties and so forth signed indicates otherwise. And I would imagine you'll probably hear more about that tomorrow in the international law lecture. Like, Russia's actually proposed an all-out ban on space weapons. Okay? They've advocated a bilateral treaty with the U.S. about limiting civilian attacks on civilian space assets. Okay, going back to space threats are insignificant. You can again argue China's not a threat, Russia's not a threat. I don't think the India question, if you're kind of comparing, if I'm dropping an argument, okay, the India question I don't think is going to be huge. They're developing stuff because they're our friends. It's probably an ally. It's probably pretty easy to say India's not a threat to us. But you probably need to answer the technological police. Well, you can say that these advanced space weapons, we ain't got the tech. The easiest argument to defend on this question is that the offense of the force projection weapons are all hype. You're probably more on the true side of the tech question on force projection weapons to say that they're not real. The technology needed, they would depend on what are called hypervelocity rods. Hypervelocity rods. And these have been nicknamed rods from God Because human beings, most people claim, humans do not have the ability to design these hypervelocity rods for these super intense offensive force projection weapons to actually have wars in space. Okay? The physics and the engineering challenges are very high. The rods from God, may be able to be developed, but the actual deployment of those require engineering and physics feats that human beings have not been able to conquer yet. Also, there's pretty solid evidence that the United States and other countries have not put in the government funding necessary to develop these weapons recently. Budget cuts all over the world, obviously, and so forth, have meant that the programs that to develop these have drastically been, the funds have drastically been cut. You can make the argument that ASATs aren't feasible. I don't necessarily think this is the best way to go. If you want to make the ASATs not feasible, you don't really want to spin it in such that we can't build an ASAT. Yeah, that's not true. Okay, it's always better to debate to argue the true sides of things. Okay, what you can argue, however, is that countermeasures. Remember, we talked about measures to take out the ASATs, right? The ASATs take out the satellites. The countermeasures make ASATs not practical and not possible. Okay? North Korea can send those decoy missiles, and that's not really against an ASAT, but countermeasures can be developed that make ASATs not as practical anymore. When more and more countermeasures keep being developed, the argument is that countries will invest less and less in ASATs. If I had spending billions of dollars on my ASAT program, and I know that there are things that can disrupt that ASAT program fairly easily, I'm going to back off of you're not going to, well, I was not going to say the government doesn't invest money in failed projects, but maybe they'll lighten up and not invest money in failed projects, okay? So the key argument here is countermeasures. Make ASAT not a valuable deterrent mechanism any longer. So I wouldn't say ASATs don't exist. You'll kind of be laughed out of the room. But the idea of countermeasures. The debate question number 2, which is probably my favorite section of the lecture. Is it advantageous for the United States to weaponize space? So we're going to do the yes side first. Yes, it is. It is advantageous. Yep. We good? Okay. So yes, it is. So here are the arguments that you can say. Here are the advantages to space weaponization, and this is very much, I think this will even be more in your debate framework of process, more so than the first debate question. Okay. The first advantage, to some say, that if the United States weaponizes space, it will deter others from weaponizing space. If we develop space weapons, it will actually keep other countries from developing them. The argument is this, that most of the U.S.'s enemies, or our hostile our hostile enemies, do have the capabilities now of engaging in low-cost, low-tech, means against our space assets. The best way to keep them from developing things is to continue to advance a meaner, larger space weapons program. The argument is they can't keep up. Okay? If I am a 4-foot third grader, am I going to pick a fight with a 6'5" high school bully? No. Even if I really, really, really want to. Right? Okay? That's the same analogy. If we continue to weaponize space, we are so far ahead of everyone else. The argument is right now. That to not continue that weaponization means we're stagnant, other countries can keep up with us, can get caught up with us. But if we continue to weaponize our space, it will deter others from even entering into developing their own weapons because they can't keep up. Okay? Military leaders around the world are pretty smart, and they're going to invest their money and resources in areas in which they think they can win. Right? And the United States has a leg up now, and the argument is we should continue to weaponize space because it prevents others, they're like, we can't catch up.